Welcome to the F50 Woman Podcast, dedicated to sharing stories from a diverse community of women in order to provoke you into a passionate pursuit of life, build unshakable character, and achieve extraordinary things. Now, here is your host, Julia Jack.
Some girls start out timid and afraid of their own bodies. Most of those girls took decades to understand why. But this girl, now sociologist and race scholar, ran to what she feared, and as a result, is now empowering whole communities to do the same. She says she's not done, and I believe her. Come in and hear why as we hear from Dr. Raja Staggers, a round and brown sociologist, race scholar, and executive director of the Cheer Institute. Stay with us on this ride through the life of another F50 woman. Hey, F50 woman. Thank you for joining us. I am here today with Raja Staggers, and we met probably maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And I tell you, when I sat down with this woman, I was impressed with her strength, her love for her son, and just things that she was doing. So hopefully we'll get into a little bit of that as we talk. But the best part of it all is hearing your story. Raja, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I believe the strongest and most powerful thing we can do is share our stories. Oftentimes we see great women like you and beautiful and just seem to have it all on straight. And we think we just need to come out of the womb straight. So it's nice to know the challenges you've overcome and the strengths you've built, and that, you know, those things actually build strength. So
Right.
Let's just start. Tell us who you were as a young woman. What did you want to do with your life, or what was your character? You tell us a little bit about who you were.
Yeah, and I like that question because I think that sometimes we believe that we're not that person, right? That we were, and we are, right? We are that same person in so many ways. So I think that as a young girl, I struggled with confidence quite a bit. I struggled with confidence because I was round and brown. And I was fortunate, however, that although the world did not always greet me with open arms, and what I mean by the world at the time, you think of someone who's 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, the world meaning the educational system. The reason why I got through, I would say, was because of my mother. My mother was a teacher, and she taught in the same educational system where my sisters and I were educated. So she was aware of quite a bit in terms of how the system worked, the things that we needed to do, and people knew her. However, I was still in classrooms where I was ignored. I was ignored as a kid. I saw preferences towards white girls, and I was not always called upon. I think that I was probably preferred over others because I was not always aggressive in a lot of things that I did in my approach, probably more passive. And being passive, I think, allowed people to accept me in some way. One of the things I've had to learn over the years was to be comfortable with being assertive, and in some way, as a Black woman, to understand, I shouldn't say understand, but to recognize or to acknowledge that people are going to see my assertiveness. People are going to see my voice. When I found my voice, they've seen that as aggression. Being who I am, coming from the body and the package that I'm coming from, and even questioning, how did you learn to love yourself? That's a transition that I know, that I should say that I'm aware of. I've learned to embrace my brown, round self, and to really enjoy and appreciate that in a way that's not sexualized, in a way that is just truly about who I am. The innocence part there, but the part that's also very much, wise and aware, and to appreciate that my little girl's still there, that she's still there inside of me. I have this interesting part of me though too, I think all of our stories there are pieces of it that are traumatizing. And I know for myself, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I think that, a big turning point for me was 9. And I actually started developing fairly early. I remember kind of fighting my development, just puberty in general, not wanting to develop breasts. I remember literally crying when my doctor said, I think when I was 8 years old or 9 years old, I'd be getting a period. I remember literally bawling. This is in the 80s. And at that time, there was the whole babies having babies campaign because there were a lot of young girls who were having babies. And people who I was in school with, friends, were starting to have children. And they were children themselves, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that terrified me. And I remember being 9 and being very resistant to that. Mm-hmm. So I know that I often speak about my 9-year-old girl. And I feel like sometimes she's inside of me. So it's a combination of, and this is what happens with Black girls. You feel like the world is pushing you to grow up very early, but then there's still this child that needs nurturing and that needs cuddling because this is a child, this is a baby, for all intents and purposes. And I think it's interesting because about that time, like within that, year, a couple of years after that, I began to look at different books and examine different books. Again, I shared my mother was a teacher, and part of our routine on Saturdays was that we would go to the library in New Haven. I was born and raised in New Haven, Connecticut. We would go there. My sisters would read what I would call normal books. Mm-hmm. They would read Little House on the Prairie, Judy Blume. I would look at Judy Blume. I was a Judy Blume person, but I was really into Our Bodies, Ourselves.
Wow, okay.
I would pick up Our Bodies, Ourselves, and I would, every weekend, went to the library. It was that book and other books on growing and developing.
Wow.
And my mother, fortunately, did not take it away from me or push me to take out something else. So I would just digest those books. I wanted to understand everything about human bodies and about reproductive health, particularly those things because they scared me, right? And I ended up going on a path where I was focused on health. And my career path is actually now really focused on health and really looking at health disparities and health inequities. But part of that along the way, it actually came from my interest in HIV/AIDS. When I was in college, I still had that same curiosity around health, around sexual health, reproductive health, and things shifted. So I'm 1920 in Washington, D.C., early mid-90s. And it's not so much, the fear of babies having babies, but it's the face of HIV/AIDS has changed. The face of HIV/AIDS is looking very Black and feminine. And I thought of my family immediately. I come from a family of women. I'm like, this sounds like us. Not that we were are people who are necessarily infected. I wouldn't have known, at the time or anything like that. But I was very curious about why are we vulnerable to higher rates of HIV. And that's something that I heard continuously as a student at Howard on the radio and in other advertisements in the media. And again, and there is this growth and there's this development. So I don't think that I'm much different in some ways than I was when I was a little girl. Still curious, similar interests, and things that sometimes I find that, I may be fearful of. I find that as an opportunity to look into it more, to understand it in a deeper way. And that I think has been very significant for me following the career path that I have.
Yeah. What I think is incredible is a lot of times things happen to us that we don't like and we run from it. But it seemed like you ran to it and said, I want to figure out what is that? So that's a skill, I think, that I like everybody to hear, that don't run from it, don't hide it, but really try to figure out what it is and what it means to me.
Right. I think that's important. What is it about this that's scary?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I think there's something, though, too, I think about, like, again, our feelings and our emotions, because we're able to process it differently that way. When we're able to kind of look at something rationally and to kind of break it down. Okay, what's the scary part about it?
Yes.
The scary part, stigma, is the scary part about this, what it says about me, and what is it saying about me, and where does that messaging come from? Yeah. And does that define me? And I think even when we think about Black girls and Black women in sexuality, whereas Black girls were oftentimes overly sexualized, as Black women, sometimes there's not space for us to be sexual. A lot of that comes from the way that we're over-sexualized as Black girls. So there has to be a point where we begin to embrace this intentionally. I'm part of this group of Black women. We have conversations Friday night just to kind of relax and unwind. And one of my girlfriends, she actually sells candy coated products.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fun. She came online, and the big part of it is around sexual health, right? Mm-hmm. But also for women to embrace their sexuality, as well as part of who they are as women, as human beings. And to do so in such a way that's safe, that's playful, and that's fulfilling. But we always don't get a chance to do that, right? And I feel like that's like the opposite side of the coin of how we're stereotyped and pigeonholed in the stigma around sexuality, particularly when it comes to Black women. And it starts when we're Black girls, and it's not necessarily in a way where we have a sense of agency over our bodies and about who we are.
Yes, yeah. And even as you're talking, I'm thinking back to my journey, and I don't think I really put together why I had issues with sexuality. Now
Right.
You're explaining it to me. I'm pretty old. For me, it was just head down. I don't know why this feels the way it does. And I just went through it. And as I got older, I was still uncomfortable with it. And I'm like, why should you be uncomfortable with it? You're not doing anything wrong. But
right.
You're explaining it very well, because it gets in your little head as a young girl, and
right.
you don't want to be that thing that you saw.
Right, exactly.
But then the natural, beautiful part of it gets lost in that.
Right.
So
exactly.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope other people are listening and hearing that. That's great. This is what you do for a living. So please tell us all what you do now as
Sure.
the other side of
the
9-year-old. Yeah.
So at 40 plus, mm-hmm. I am a medical sociologist.
Wow.
And I'm a public health practitioner. I have a doctorate in sociology, and the areas of my specialty are medical sociology and then also race, class, gender. So in terms of what I do, that's my training. I'm a college professor, so I teach full-time at a school in Springfield Technical Community College is where I am full-time. I also do other adjunct work at other schools. Last year I was at Yale, in addition to my main job at Springfield Technical. Prior to that, I was at UMass. This year I'm at a school in Jersey doing some work. But my passion is my organization, my nonprofit called Cheer Institute. And Cheer Institute is an organization that I established in 2013. And the focus of Cheer is to address health inequities in communities of color, particularly among Black and Brown populations, and really understanding and unraveling and addressing social inequities tied to racism that lead to adverse health. So that's a lot of the work of Cheer. So the acronym Cheer actually stands for Community Health Education, Empowerment, and Research. Our approach is that we do focus on community health education. We focus on community-based participatory research, working closely with community members, engaging community members in research and making sure that they are appropriately paid or compensated in any way for research. And not only that, but anything that we find in terms of research goes back into helping the community.
Right.
And then we're also involved in advocacy work and policy work. Recently, we just got some funding from Social Ventures Partnership out of Fairfield County to do work in New Haven and Bridgeport to address policy and really those policies around racism that will have implications to improve the health outcomes and other social outcomes for communities of color in Bridgeport and New Haven. One of the pillars of Cheer Institute and really of my work, what we call the social determinants of health. And with the social determinants of health, we're talking about those social drivers, whether it be education, economics, racism, food, the broader environment policies, and how they come together to impact health. Cheer is my passion.
Yeah.
In the morning, I wake up, I think about Cheer. I think about Cheer throughout the day. I think about Cheer before bed. I think about Cheer on the weekends. So that's really my passion because I'm committed to this work in so many ways. It's who I am. And I think that that's always been who I've been in terms of the work of Cheer Institute.
So what is your vision forward? If you had your desire come true, what would be the outcome of your work with Cheer? Envision a world for me. What would that look like? What would change? Maybe one thing.
What would change? I see healthy communities. I see communities where Black and brown people of having the resources that people need to live healthy lives, that these communities are sustainable, that we have, and it's normal, it's normalized in terms of seeing people engage in physical activities in the community that they're in, that it's normalized that people have access to places where they can go to get foods that are healthy, either available to them free or very low cost. It's normalized that people have ways of making foods that are healthy for their families, that the health outcomes that we see are disproportionately affecting communities of color are no more, that there is equity, right? That our communities have the resources that we need, that there's a sense of self-sufficiency. That would be a beautiful vision in terms of seeing, streets and communities that look embracing, that children don't have to feel fearful, that they feel that the adults are capable, that the community is truly a community, so that people are protected and they know each other and that there is support. So that's what we mean by health.
Yeah.
And again, it's not just, can I go to a doctor? We're talking about healthy communities. We're talking about spiritual health. We're talking about emotional health.
Yeah.
We're talking about feeling a sense of safety. And we have to recognize that that's also signaling when we look at communities.
Yep.
We can look at the buildings, we can look at the homes, we can look at the people who we see out on the street, and we get a sense of how healthy a community is. That's what I see. I see a vision for that for communities of color.
Yes, I love that. I was just on a program and someone was sharing about in architecture how buildings are designed that create that separation. And it's very subtle. And I'm going to ask you this question, and please, everybody forgive me if this is just ignorant or just not funny. In our neighborhood, we often see white people jogging, and we're wondering why, talking about how the Black woman or the Black person, it tends to have obesity issues. And you don't really see Black people jogging on the street too much. And why is that? We're not runners, or are we afraid to run outside for some reason? Or, why is that? I don't know if you have the answer, but.
I think it's not that we don't, and we see these organizations like Black Girl Run. There's a Black Girl Run Hartford, Black Girl Run New Haven, and there are other national organizations of Black women around fitness. I think what happens is it's just not normalized for us to think about Black people engaged in physical fitness. I talked to a friend who recently moved to Jamaica, and she was just saying how beautiful it was that in Jamaica, it was so normal to see people getting up in the morning, Black people getting up in the morning and jogging and being engaged in physical activity.
Yeah.
I'd like to put this out there, and this is not a quick answer to that response, but I'm speaking about this broad population scale, okay? Not individual in terms of your behavior or my behavior, right? Mm-hmm. Because we can't talk about what every person does. Right. But let's talk about broad scale. When we talk about exercise, there is the leisure time physical activity. Mm-hmm. And then there are those other activities that people engage in, right? Whether it be someone's walking to work or walking to the bus stop, or even if they get to the bus stop, walking certain, number of miles to get to the work from there. Or if someone has a job where they're on their feet all day. If we look at the kind of work people are doing, we look at systems of inequality, we find that there may be more people of color who are engaged in work, that actually may be more labor intensive. But what that also means is there may be less time for that leisure time physical activity. When we talk about things such as exercise in that regard, we're talking about people creating time, carving out time to have that time for leisure to do that. And then also when you add on to that, seeing people jogging in communities. When you ask me about the vision, I think about an Albany Avenue. Now, do we see people jogging on Albany Avenue? We have to think about the reasons why we might not. The same reasons why a mother might not easily send her child outside to go play in the street, because there may be other safety pieces that are signaling. The environment might not be built for that. So we talk about that vision, and in that vision, there should be people, Black people, Black women jogging on streets for their kids to be able to play and have playgrounds. If we drive around parts of Hartford and communities in Hartford that are more disenfranchised, we're going to see abandoned parking lots, a little bit of grass sprouting up, and not necessarily spaces that are fit for walking and jogging.
Right.
We see a higher number of spaces for physical activity and exercise in predominantly white communities.
Yeah.
In terms of having sidewalks, having the green spaces to support that.
Green trails and all sorts of things.
Green trails,
yep.
Exactly. But the other part, and we have to be honest about that too, is that sometimes it's not always comfortable being, one of few people of color in those spaces who do that. And when we go in mass, sometimes we're not always welcome when we go there. We need to have those spaces where we live because that's part of our health. And we
Right.
can't confuse not seeing it with there being not the need, because not seeing it can be a larger indication of the absence of resources. So if we have those resources, believe me, people will use them.
Yeah.
I think of a video that I showed and I was talking to a group of students about recently out of Springfield, and this is not uncommon. This happens in Connecticut and other places around this country. There was a group in Springfield, this is going back some years, this is 2000s, believe it or not, and they literally had to show the city their grocery receipt to show the city that they needed grocery stores in their community. It was almost a belief that just because there were no grocery stores in the communities, that people didn't shop the same way.
Yeah.
I mean, we could take that same thinking in terms of, how we might not see people exercising. People have to eat. People have bodies that are working and people don't have transportation. People are exercising. It may not be leisure time.
Right.
But people are engaged in physical activity. We'll call it physical activity because between 5 and 7, so they may be trying to get to a job. They may be taking a couple of buses, walking a couple of blocks to get there, and the same thing on the way home before they're preparing dinner and doing homework with the kids and doing these other things, right?
Good point.
So we have to consider that to, really emphasize the leisure time piece. And just because we don't see it doesn't mean there's not a need for it. It oftentimes is an indication of a lack of resources. People need to eat. People need to exercise. People want to be healthy. How do we normalize finding ways for people to be healthy, and particularly for Black women? And I struggle with this so much myself. I have these conversations all the time. I struggle with my weight. That's been a lifelong struggle for me. I struggle with finding the time and carving out time for myself. It's easy for my friends, calls, someone needs to talk. My son needs this. I have to get this for my sister. One job requires this. I have a consultation. And then what happens is there's this little voice left to say, what about Raja?
Yeah.
What about Raja's needs? What about Raja's longevity? What about Raja's heart? What about Raja's mental health? Because physical activity helps with all of those things, right? Helps with my mental health, helps with my emotional health, helps connecting me spiritually. Because I like to listen to my gospel music when I work out. That helps me. And we often put ourselves last. So we have to normalize carving out time and putting ourselves on the agenda.
Yeah.
And that's something I can't say. When I thought about coming on the show, Julia, I thought a lot about, oh my gosh, I'm not finished yet.
If you are enjoying the F50 Woman podcast, don't forget to share your positive comments and ratings and share us on all your favorite social media channels. F50 Woman is a movement created for women, spread by women. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show and your host, Julia Jack.
The beautiful part about being a woman and to be at this stage of my life, at 44, is to say, no, I'm not finished yet. I don't want to be finished. I want to continuously be working on these things. I want God to use me to work on these things, right? And to be a demonstration of that. I love when I see women who are different stages of their lives, who are continuing to build and recreate themselves and to grow,
Absolutely. Yeah, that's beautiful. You're definitely not done. I could tell from all you shared, you're definitely not done. So it sounds like you were a 9-year-old girl. You really sort of graduated into this passion of yours. Was there an aha moment? Was there a spark? Was there something that happened that sort of turned you in a different direction or turned you more passionately towards where you were going? Was there anything that happened? Was there a moment?
Yeah. A moment for me. Gosh, I feel like there have been so many. I've been very fortunate because I feel like, I kind of step into a moment and the universe has really allowed for things to kind of enhance it,
right.
At the time. So it kind of grows.
Okay.
So I would say even for, HIV/AIDS work, with the messaging around HIV/AIDS, I became worried, myself. So I remember there was a clinic in Washington, D.C., the Whitman Walker Clinic. I would bring myself. I actually started a routine. I actually tell my son this 20, so we have these conversations. I remember at that time, when you would get tested for HIV, you would have to wait like 2 weeks. Terrifying.
Yeah.
right?
Waiting for the,
Absolutely terrifying.
yeah.
Yeah. Then you have to physically go in, and then you'd have to go back. And I felt like in some ways maybe I was kind of torturing myself to do this, but it became practice.
Okay.
Even for myself, at this stage, it's like when I go for my gynecological exam, I always ask for, an HIV/AIDS test. I think being in DC at that time, and DC had really high rates of HIV, and I learned, I didn't know this until later, that New Haven, Connecticut had some of the highest rates of HIV/AIDS nationally. And I discovered after that there were people around me who I didn't realize who were affected by HIV, living with HIV/AIDS. Now prior, if we go back to the 90s, people were dying
Yes.
of HIV/AIDS, right? And there are still people of color who are dying of HIV/AIDS. But that was so significant for me. And it became part of my practice. It became part of my understanding around infectious disease, around responsibility, around even stigma. When I went to Howard, I was going to become a medical doctor. I kind of ignored my artistic side. I wanted to become an interior designer. And I was not thriving the way I wanted to in my hard sciences. I was thriving in my social sciences. I studied psychology. I was really interested in health psychology. And with my passion around HIV and really trying to understand it was personal. Like, again, being this kid who was really interested in reproductive health, being this kid who was curious about sex and sexuality, I ended up going to New York University to study public health and community health. And I was going to different community spaces and understanding HIV/AIDS among Muslim women. And again, going to the public health department in New York City, understanding how HIV/AIDS was affecting different communities. So that was a big part of my early work and in doing community health education. Then there was a time of my life I was working for a national organization. We did training and technical assistance with other organizations around the country that were offering preventative care and treatment and care, healthcare, medical treatment for people who are living with HIV/AIDS. And that's where I discovered that New Haven, Connecticut had some of the highest rates of HIV/AIDS in the country. When I was at Howard, a couple of people brought that to my attention. They would say, "Oh, you're from New Haven." I'm like, I don't know, like in dating, I didn't understand. But I received more information of people who I had known, were living with HIV at the time. So it was very close to me.
Okay.
And the organization that I worked for was a mostly consumer-based, meaning that people who were working for the organization were also living with HIV/AIDS. That was probably very significant for me in terms of my work and my early passion, particularly around health disparities, to understand how that worked. And then I think the other part is I dive in. So
I see
even
that.
as I'm putting myself in that place, I'm understanding that this could be any of us, right? I remember talking to people and really trying to understand why it was that saw a lot of young Black girls who are more susceptible at this time, especially as the epidemic in Washington, D.C. and in this country was becoming more brown and feminine. And we had to look at, again, the social circumstances. We had to look at economics. We had to look at power dynamics. We had to look at vulnerability and how all of these factors could make someone more susceptible to HIV/AIDS infection. It doesn't stop with HIV/AIDS infection, right? We see that with COVID, right? We see that it plays its role with other health conditions and other areas of vulnerability for people of color. So these are examples, in some cases, of larger social experiences that people have. Some cases, and the simple answer is sometimes education, and I don't want to oversimplify and say that education is not significant, because I know for myself, my girlfriends and I, we often have these conversations, something happened. What should I do?
Yeah.
What steps do I need to take?
Yep.
We've been there. All of us have, I feel like many of us have been there.
Yeah.
I'm in a situation, what do I need to do? Should I be concerned? Okay, there are concerns, but what do we do that's practical first?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question, Julia.
You did. Yes. I can see that a big factor was around concern about the HIV/AIDS situation that was going on at the time. And you can see how that really pulled you. Do you think part of it has to do with Black culture? In my husband's family, he tends to feel like when he was growing up, it was a culture of it's family business. And it's just not something we go and talk to everybody about. Do you think that's one of the problems that's widespread?
There is a part though too. We have to recognize that, in terms of, when we talk about certain health concerns, that culturally there are some things that we don't talk about, right? I just had an incident with my son, and we were just leaving a store, And it was a situation where we were looking at some furniture. She kind of pushed her way in. And then I was like, okay, we're moving back because I'm like, I'm not comfortable. And then I actually called for an associate to help me find something. And the associate went to this couple. The couple happened to be white first. And I was like, excuse me, you know. And then afterwards, I said, I was the person who called you. When I left that, I was thinking about my work. I was thinking about my conversations. And I was thinking about when we think about race, and this is just an example, is that oftentimes there's like a shame in that, though, too, even when we're talking to our kids about it, even when we're experiencing it. And I think that with Black people and Black culture, I feel like part of it is all this, like sometimes I feel like there's some shame, you know, in some of the things and the experiences that we have, even sometimes to say, okay, this should not happen.
Yeah.
Right. Or maybe we didn't have the resource or we didn't know, you know, at that time to do better.
Yeah.
Right. We have to do some shifting to get healthier.
Right. Ourselves. You know?
Ourselves. Right. And part of that is talking about it and acknowledging our pain and being okay with that. Right. But we do have to have the support to do that.
Yes.
I mean, we have to support each other and create the spaces to have those kinds of conversations. I think oftentimes we don't have enough spaces to have these conversations so that it can become normalized and that we're continuously doing this. So I think that, you know, we're talking about, you know, HIV/AIDS, we're talking about sexuality, we're talking about when you think about early on, it was really needed for churches to have these conversations. Some churches do. You know, some churches recognize they have to. And some churches, they had to be pushed in that direction.
Yes.
I have a friend who's a pastor, and we had this conversation. He's like, you know what? We have to talk to our youth about this. We absolutely have to. Yeah. And there were so many people who really needed the churches to be able to do that. Yeah. To have conversations about health, to have conversations about HIV. But I do think that we do have some work to do from a cultural perspective. And this is not to say that, you know what, we have a cultural deficiency in any way, but just in terms of considering, you know, some of the conservative kind of practices that we hold on to that can become barriers to good health. So I think we need to re-examine some of that, though, too, to see, okay, if this is not going to support the outcomes that we need to have, how can we make room, you know, for us to bring in these conversations to embrace this part of who we are or this part of our experience and to let go of the shame. Yeah. Right. I think a big part, first of all, is just saying what it is.
Yes.
Being honest, you know, I mean, because so many of these things we're affected by collectively. Yeah. And we just don't talk about it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so true that we just don't talk about it. And I'm thinking back into my history, and if it was just okay to say, this is what's happening, or this is what I'm going through. And then I'm comparing myself to some families in my community that are not Black. And I've often been dumbfounded a little bit by their openness with things. You know, it's sort of like, are you talking about that? You can't talk about that, can we? So
right. I mean, and other people don't do like you know, like white families don't often talk about racism, right? They don't talk about race,
right?
Racism, even like history of illness, right? But people don't talk about, like, you know, the diabetes in families.
Yeah.
Right. And this is not just a Black thing either. You know, Indigenous people do this. Native American people do this. And what happens is that oftentimes there is a belief for some people that that's just what it is. You know, grandma was diabetic and mommy was diabetic and, you know, uncle was diabetic. And therefore that's just what our family, but not recognizing that that's miseducation. Diabetes doesn't have to be genetic. Often the connection is diet and behavior.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's not that it has to be passed down.
Right.
In that regard. So again, I wanted to intentionally include the health education piece and share, because without the health education piece, without the health literacy piece, we don't have the empowerment part. And that's what's so necessary as well, that we have to begin to be very clear about what the situations are.
Yes.
And that to know that there are opportunities for change for the better.
Yes.
And we have to be committed to that. We have to be committed to wanting better for our children, for our grandchildren, for our great-grandchildren.
Yep.
and I'm going to put this out there though too. This is another piece, more women who I've been in contact with, and there's been more conversation about, and I think about this for myself in terms of our bodies and in terms of owning our bodies and our having a sense of agency in terms of just even, unwanted touch, having conversations with children about boundaries, right? About, in Black families, in terms of, you don't have to encourage your kids to hug everyone or to allow people to go into their space to a point where they're uncomfortable, right? I mean, I think that when I was a kid, I wasn't taught that.
No.
I wasn't taught that at all. You know what I mean? And these are conversations that people are beginning to have more and more, I think, as people are becoming more aware. But I see that to be so very much tied to a sense of self-worth. And I don't see that as separate from a Black woman's reproductive health and Black women's sexuality, in terms of having that sense of defined boundaries with people about, who you are, and a sense of belonging places without being made vulnerable or victim to someone else's advances. Because that's been a challenge for I think, for Black women always in this country.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you're trying to fit and you don't want to shake the tree or be a problem. Exactly. You don't want to be a problem.
But this since African women have come to this country, that's been foundational to us in terms of people having the right to touch our bodies and for there to be no recourse for us in that regard. So we have to be adamant about making sure that we, on one hand, feel as though we have the right to be there. Yeah. Right. And the right to be there and to be protected and for folks to know that we have our own space. Right. And we have boundaries around who can access us.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So do you have a mentor? Did you have mentors? Or is there anyone, this can be very controversial. Is there anyone that pulls you back and says, okay, take some time with that? Or is there anyone who says, yeah, don't hold on to that and push you forward? Did you have?
Right. You know what? I wish I had I can say I had one mentor, but I can't say that I've had one.
Okay.
I think I've been blessed to have many people in my life who've influenced me, and who I've admired. But is there one person who I've gone to for coaching? No, I've often sought that.
Okay.
I have a wonderful mother, but I've also sought other mothers. It's not one person.
Okay.
Many people have fed me at different times of my life. I think about a lovely friend, family member. She's the mother of my son's godfather, who just passed away last month. Yeah. Beautiful spirit, beautiful person. And I would not have thought of her as a mentor, as you say it, but as I think about her, and I keep thinking about her, and I keep thinking about, her legacy and what I can do around sharing and spreading her legacy and sharing how she loved. I can't say that she was not a mentor for me.
Yeah.
We never had a formal mentor agreement. We never had that kind of relationship about, whether or not, will you be my mentor? No. She showed up and she loved me. She showed up and she encouraged me when I was trying to figure out how to mother. She embraced me and accepted me as a young woman who was developing. And what I loved about her, and I love about her legacy, is that she was constantly a woman who was growing and changing. And she was a minister, and her ministry was around encouragement. But she used so many ways through art, right, through poetry, right, through her writing to show it and to get that message across. And she loved. I would find her in a family event, and I would kind of get her in a corner and kind of suck all of the energy in because of how she loved. Yeah. So I felt that it wasn't the formal, this is how you navigate your career kind of conversation, but it was more like, this is how women love.
Right.
And in that sense, that was a kind of a mentoring, but it was a loving.
Yeah.
Right. That's something that I strive to give back.
Yes. That's
Do you know
beautiful.
what I mean?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. That's what I would love all of us to be, especially if we've gone through things and have knowledge and support to share, because there's so many women out there who just need.
Right.
Yeah. And love them.
Right.
Yeah.
And encourage them. I do believe that there are some paths I don't like. I don't want my son to take certain paths on his journey.
Right.
But the reality is that I can tell him, I'm like, listen, Jabril, I want you to go this path to get to this journey.
Yeah.
I realize and I know
Mm-hmm.
that even if I tell him to go on the path to which I'm advising, there are going to be bumps on that path.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to trust him. And when I say more than, I have to trust God
Mm-hmm.
to know that God has a direction for my son's life.
Yeah.
That even though this path looked this particular way for me, my son is going to be able to say, well, Mommy, there was something on that path, and it required me to take a detour on a path that was unknown to you, that I needed to take. And that's significant to his journey.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I do.
So I think that when we talk about loving and encouraging, and that as a kind of in a form of mentorship, as opposed to like, do X, Y, and Z, and then you do this and you do that, that's different, because I feel like there is some confidence that develops in you, in terms of trusting yourself.
Yes.
And even trusting the mistakes,
Yeah.
and learning from them and loving yourself regardless.
Yeah.
And
they even looking back and saying, okay, I don't have to be afraid of what's forward, because look what I just did back there. And
exactly.
like you said, that's the trusting yourself part. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then for the moms out there and for the grandmothers, just accepting them for where they are. Because like you said, I have a path that I like all my children to go on, but they're not going to go on my path. They're probably going to twist and turn, and they might quit their job because they want to be an artist or find themselves.
Right.
And yeah.
Right. And even if we tell them to go on that path, the thing is, Julie, to be honest with you, the path may not always look the way that it looked when we were on it.
Yeah.
Right?
Good point.
Teachers on that path, and our kids are we need to make sure that we've instilled in them enough trust in themselves and faith to know that, they're going to have to make decisions.
Yeah.
Even if we send them along that path, they may have to, again, take a detour.
Yeah.
We have to have faith in them. We have to teach them. There are other skills that we have to teach them, so that they're able to make appropriate decisions as they take these detours. Yeah. Because we've had to do it, right? My mother, I had to reflect on her bravery in so many ways. I know at times when she was scared, right? And she did things her mother would not do. And my mother has seen me things do that she wouldn't do.
Yeah.
Right. And I just want for my son to, again, to take those chances of that he's honoring the journey.
Yeah.
That he's supposed to be on. I mean, at the end of the day, right? I mean, he has his journey, he has his life. And I think for other young people, other women is to honor and to love them, right? Not to tell them, it has to be so prescriptive. Now, I can give you the prescriptive part that works for me.
Yeah.
And I'm not opposed to doing that, right? And there are some things I would say, well, don't do this or do that. But the reality is that it's not always set in stone.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're talking about love. So I this perfect segue into the question of my lifetime. Why do you think hate spreads faster than love, or do you not even believe that's true?
I think that hate does spread faster than love. I would actually say because of ignorance.
Okay.
I think that ignorance is what allows hate to spread. I think that if we knew the truth meaning that we are all connected.
Yeah.
We all need each other.
Yeah.
Right? That we are all parts of the puzzle. That we would love each other differently.
Wow. Yeah.
Like with COVID, think about people who are getting very angry about, having to wear a mask.
Yeah.
Right? Not understanding in some ways that when you wear a mask, you're showing people who are very vulnerable that you love them.
Yeah.
We could talk about how we're handling it as a country.
Yeah.
But we have to consider again how this is affecting the world. And like what's happening right now in India, right? What's happening in Brazil, right? And the reality is that unless this is addressed globally, like smallpox or other, infectious diseases, that this can continue to grow, and it will continue to grow. We'll continue to see different strands, and we're all going to be vulnerable.
Yeah,
we are all so very connected.
Yeah.
I am a as I mentioned before, a sociologist who studies inequality. I'm a race scholar as well. And I talk about race, I talk about social inequality, but at the end of the day, it's about justice for me.
Yeah.
Right. And that comes from a place of love. And when I talk about, the inequality, some people say, well, that's divisive. It's not divisive. We have to be able to talk about it before we can address it and solve it.
We can heal it. Right.
Exactly. And it's really about bringing forward truth. Now, when I think about, like, when I do trainings around diversity and inclusion, we talk about race. Race is a social construction. Race is not real, right? We're all human. And so people say, well, what about different diseases that we see? And what about, the fact that people have dark skin, people have wider noses, et cetera, et cetera. Like, those are climatic adaptations. This speaks about where people come from.
Yeah.
The value has been attached to that for some reason. Because
right.
it helps people to further their agendas, right? So I think that when we talk about hate spreading faster than love, it's a lot of the ignorance.
Yeah.
It's when we get to truth, when we recognize at the end of the day, we are our needs are very basic.
Very basic.
Very basic.
Yes.
And we all have very basic needs.
Yeah.
And one of our basic needs is to be loved.
Yes. Wow. Very, very good point. We're just missing the basic point that we're all animals, if I could put it that way.
We are.
So what is next for you, Raja? What is next? You're not done yet. So what is next?
I'm not done yet. One of the things, I was joking with my son today, we're small, the two of us, and I know he's tired of me, but I was like, you know what? I've got to start being myself. Right?
Right.
But part of it is like, at the end of the day, I'm someone who wants to practice African dance. I want to sing jazz. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, that's me. But the other part is that I have really suppressed my artistic side. What's next for me is I have to take a journey to rediscover. I was listening to one of my son's lectures, how he brought up Toni Morrison's language, to remember, right? But for me to rediscover my artistic side. Arts were such a part of my early upbringing. And even my mother, as a history teacher, she directed plays. And, she would do musicals. My son is studying music at NYU. And I've taken this path of scholarship and research. And I love that. And I feel like, okay, it's not fully vetted yet. I haven't fully explored it. But just as I encourage my son, who is into music, but is also a great visual artist, I'm like, honey, sometimes you have to draw so that you can find the song that you want. And I feel that for myself, I may have to get back to writing poetry. Yes. Or to movement, in different ways, to be able to understand with clarity, some of the research I'm doing. And I'm not doing the art for the research clarity purpose, actually. I'm talking about it for who I am.
Yeah. So just a couple more questions.
Okay.
What's one book you would advise women to read?
One book, I would say just one book, probably Sisters of the Yam. Bell Hooks.
Sisters of the Yam?
Sisters of the Yam.
Okay. I've never heard of that one. Okay.
Yeah, I think you'll love it. I found that book years ago. It's actually it's actually a self-help book, believe it or not.
Okay.
And I believe that when Bell Hooks wrote that book, she was intentionally trying to write this book in a way that was not as academic. Okay. Right. And the idea here was for women to be able, and particularly women of color, on one hand, to recognize the larger social political context in which we're forced to, that we navigate, but in that process to really find ourselves, right? Okay. And to recognize what that is, but to still recognize who we are as humans.
Okay.
And to take care of ourselves in that.
Okay. Interesting. And is it written as a fiction or is it
no.
Okay.
It's not. So it's nonfiction.
Okay.
And it's a self-help book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. And the other question is, what is one thing that you can't not do every day? So one thing you have to do.
One thing I have to do every day, my goodness. I almost want to laugh at some of these things I have to do every day.
Yeah.
One of the things I have to do every day. Geez. I would say brush my teeth.
Okay.
I have to.
Okay. So if you couldn't do anything else, you got up and there's only one thing today.
I need to brush my teeth.
Okay.
I need to brush my teeth. I feel that, I'm not going to be able to talk appropriately,
Okay.
or that's one of the things I have to do, but I don't know if I like that one.
Right.
One of the things I have to do every day. See, I kind of like the brush my teeth thing. Some people will say they have to take a shower to focus.
Yeah.
To kind of get ready for the day.
Yeah.
I feel like with brushing my teeth, and I don't know if I like how this would actually sound. But the reality is, it's like, sometimes, and I'll be honest, I think like a lot of women, you're rushing. It's like, you know what, I'm going to wash my face. I have to run out and do a couple of things. But I feel like I have to brush my teeth, even with a mask on. Like, it helps me to get ready.
Yeah. No, that's real. Yeah.
But it is. It's just like, just to be prepared. One of the things I have to do every day, let me see. I will say this is just a thing, to be honest with you. And I'm trying to work on this. Is like, I'm a coffee drinker.
Yeah, I'm guilty. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm a coffee drinker. Yeah. And I was trying, because I was actually moving away from the coffee, but even when I did, it became decaf.
Okay.
And I like the smell of coffee.
Yes, me too.
I do. Like, so even if it's decaf or a half calf, because I'll do half calf, I'll brew a pot of regular caffeinated coffee.
Yes.
And I'll do a pod with decaf, and I'll add some of the caffeinated coffee in it. Or even if I walk into Starbucks, I'm a coffee person. So one of the things I enjoy and that I like to have as part of my day is a cup of coffee. Yeah. I think I'm more comfortable with that one.
Okay.
And I think that people probably know that about me. I love it. Even if I'm not drinking it, I love the smell. I love the idea of like coffee houses,
I so get it. Yes.
Yeah.
I love the smell. If I don't have it in the morning, I'm trying to figure out when I can get it.
No,
We're not getting it yet. Can we get it now? I got to take a break.
Exactly. No, I do. I find a reason to. Like, if I don't have it in the morning, I figure out, like, I will plot around my day to figure out when I'm going to have coffee somehow.
Yes.
So
if my husband's listening, listen, it's normal. I'm not the only one. Yeah. That's a real thing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. Can you please tell us how we can get in touch with you after we listen to this?
Sure. So I think the best way to get in touch with is probably via email. You can find the Facebook for Cheer Institute. Well, I should say the Cheer Institute on Facebook. Okay. You can just simply look for Cheer Institute, CHEER Institute.
Okay.
You could also email me, Raja, RAJA at Cheer, CHEER Institute, INSTITUTE.org. That's probably the best way. You can also go to the website, www.cheerinstitute.org, and you'll see a link to my email address there. So that's the best way, particularly if anyone has, if they'd like to partner around community work, if anyone likes to have further conversation around partnership, around community health and healing, wellness, I'd love to talk with you.
Great. Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this was a great conversation. I appreciate you taking the time, and we look forward to what's coming in the future. And, I'm going to keep an eye and see how I can get involved. I don't know, I'm an architect, so I'm not sure about
that'd be awesome.
But I know it's part of our lives. It's a part we can't avoid no matter what we do.
Absolutely.
So,
thank you so much, Julia. Okay, you take good care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the F50 Woman Podcast. Join the F50 Woman movement and this diverse group of voices to help change the world one woman at a time. Why should you join at your age? Because we're not done yet.